Welcome to My Life, Tanya Applied with Rabbi Simon Jacobson, a journey into the deepest teachings of Torah and their application to our personal, emotional, and psychological lives.
A gute Woche and a good gebenchte Jahr. Gmar Chesima Teva. We continue our journey in the life-changing Sefer Tanya. And being that we are in these special days between Yom Kippur and Sukkos, we'll share a few words about that and then continue where we are up to in Tanya in chapter 28. This program is made possible by Rena Lights LLC, and it's in honor and memory of Rabbi Yosef Halevi Weinberg Olav Shalom, Rabbi Moshe Pinchas HaKohen Katz Olav Shalom, Rabbi Yael HaKohen Khan Olav Shalom. It's also in Sukkos and merit of Rabbi Zev Yecheskel HaKohen Arisha Katz Le'erich Yomim V'Shanim Tevis, for many long, healthy years. And it's also in Sukkos of Yidden everywhere to be protected by Hashem, Hine Le'yonim V'Layushin Shemer Yisrael, both in Eretz Yisrael and outside of Eretz Yisrael. And our hearts go out to the families, tragically lost some family members in Manchester. And going forward, it should only be Achtei V'Chesed, B'Tei V'Anira V'Anigla, with the Geula Hamitis V'Ashlema. These days are special days. First of all, the entire month of Tishrei. It's like the Medrash says, Chedesh HaShvi. Shvi also comes from the Muzba, from Vesavota. It's sated, it's satiated, it's filled with moedes, with holidays. Rosh Hashanah, Saris Yemei Tshuva, Yom Kippur, the 4 days between Yom Kippur and Sukkos, concluding with Shmini Atzeres and Simchas Torah. And across the entire spectrum, from the renewal of Rosh Hashanah to the Tshuva and return of Saris Yemei Tshuva, to the sanctity and ultimate connection to Hashem and Yom Kippur, to the joy of Sukkos, and the ultimate ecstatic joy of Shmini Atzeres and Simchas Torah. So as the Zohar says, the first half of the month is like Smeili Tachas L'Reishi, Smeili, Yomim Neroyim, it's more Gvura, awe, reverence, days of reverence. And the second half, Yemini Techapkeni, my right hand, right, Chesed, embraces me. Days of Simcha, of joy. And they go hand in hand. They go hand in hand. Hazerim bedima, berina yekseru. Those that sow in tears will reap with joy. And indeed, it says clearly in Chassidus, based on different Sfarim, and different Makedas and Kabbalah, Tiku b'cheda shefer b'kesa liyem chagenu. That which is b'kesa, concealed, b'cheda shefer in Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, is liyem chagenu, gets revealed in the Chag HaSukkos Masim Chasenu. So it's actually the revelation of the joy, which in the Rosh Hashanah Yom Kippur is more subdued, V'gilu Barada. It's in a more concealed state. There's Gilu, there's celebration, but it's Barada, it's with trembling, it's with a certain measure of awe and reverence. Simchas Torah breaks out in song and dance, and everyday Malam B'Kedesh, until the ecstatic dance of Shmini Atzeres and Simchas Torah. The name of B'Shem Abal Shem Tov, we know that the day after Yom Kippur is called B'Shem Hashem, God's Nomen. It's explained that the 4 days between Rosh Hashanah, between Yom Kippur and Sukkos, corresponds to the 4 Aces of Shem Havaya, Yud, Kei, Vov, Kei. And that, of course, consistent with the Medrash, V'lakachta Lechem B'Yem HaRishon, it says, B'Yem HaRishon, you shall take the Daled Minim. What's Yem HaRishon? So Rishon l'cheshbon ha'avenos, because after Yom Kippur begins a new slate. So it's Rishon, the first for cheshbon ha'avenos, for the calculating of our transgressions. But the question is asked, that's the day after Yom Kippur. Kachacham b'Yem HaRishon is referring to the first day of Sukkos. So the answer the Medrash gives is because the 4 days between Yom Kippur and Sukkos, Yidden are asukim b'mitzvahs. They're busy with mitzvahs, building a sukkah, gathering the Daled Minim. So when you're busy with mitzvahs, there's no yet beginning of Avenis. It only begins after that. So they see these days are still under the effect powerful effect of Yom Kippur. And as such, they help transition from the reverence of Smeli Tachlis L'Reishi of the first half of the month to the second half, which begins, of course, on the 15th of the month, Sukkos, the full moon, which also represents fullness in Gilui. Whereas before that, you don't see the Gilui so much. It's more of an Etzem. And that's the joining of the two, the eloquent and poetic connection of the Jewish calendar in general, especially here, especially when you follow the flow. Before that was the month of El. Before that we had the 3 weeks and the 9 days, Moshe on the mountain praying for the Eden. And before that, Matan Torah. And before that, Yetzias Mitzrayim. So it's one long flow from Yetzias Mitzrayim to Matan Torah, the Luchas Hashenis. Then the breaking of the Luchas after the Chet HaEgel, Shavasar B'Tammuz. 40 days later is Rosh Chodesh El, Moshe is davening for the Yidden for forgiveness. 40 days after that is Yom Kippur. Moshe davening and finally succeeding, Salachti Kidvarecha. And that success brings the second tablets, which in turn we celebrate Sukkos. Like it says, that the schach of the Sukkah comes from the Anan HaKteris, from the cloud of the Kteris, of the incense that was brought in Yom Kippurim, Yom Kippur Kedesh Kadoshim, by the Kohen Gadol. And that concludes and continues through Sukkos in a matter of joy and explosion, an eruption of joy and simcha. And in our lives, it reflects all the cycles of life, the ups and downs, the twists and turns. Yes, the betrayal, but also the reconciliation. We all have the Chet HaEgel within ourselves, the mistakes we've made, setbacks, transgressions, iniquities. But then comes the tikkun, the repair, the healing, the tshuva. And then comes the celebration for all of that. So here we're right now, literally in the middle of the month, about to enter into Sukkos, coming from Rosh Hashanah Yom Kippur. Powerful days that we have to make a keli to access and draw into our lives. So Hashem should bless each one of us to do exactly that, to take the seriousness, the accountability. I mean, you're accountable to something you love. The accountability that we displayed on Rosh Hashanah Yom Kippur, and translate that into a tremendous joy, where all the Yidden sit together, Kol Yisrael Ruim Leisha B'Sukkah Achas. They're worthy of sitting as one. And it's a holiday of Achdus. We join the 4 Dalad Minim Ba'Aguda Achas in one bind. And the Dalad Minim represent 4 different types of Yidden, like the Medrash says. The Esrig that has Tam and Reach, both taste and smell, represents a Yid that has both Torah and mitzvahs. The Lulav that only has Reach, Tam and no Reach, represents those that have Torah but not mitzvahs. The Hadassim that have Reach and no Tam is mitzvahs without Torah. And Arova doesn't have Tam and no Reach, represents the Ish Poshet. But they all are bound together. The simple person is bound together in one union, and we sit together in one sukkah. That Achdus is so much connected to Simcha. That's why in Simcha Kreise, Simcha Yachid is Simcha's Kreise. You don't have Simcha when you're alone. Simcha is only when you do it together with others. It's the revelation of the unity we experience in Yom Kippur and on Rosh Hashanah, but especially Yom Kippur, Achaz B'Shana, and with the conclusion of Yom Kippur from Ne'ilah, Hano Malka B'Chadehi, that leads into Sukkos and ultimately into Shmini Atzeres and Simchas Torah. So on a personal level, it means that we have both accountability and the soul searching and the introspection and the corrections and the repair that we make, and then the celebration that comes with it. And celebration is part of the Aved, and a critical component, because you have to serve Hashem with Simcha, which is a perfect transition into the Tanya that we're learning, which is literally about this topic. The terrible and negative impact of having negative thoughts that demoralize, the opposite of Simcha. So Alter Rebbe began to explain in chapter 26 in Tanya, So till chapter 26, he was talking about the very battle between the Nefesh Elokis and Nefesh Habamis and the different methods we use in order to overcome that battle and that the Nefesh Elokis should be the dominant force in our lives. But then comes human attitudes. You can be a very powerful person, but if your attitude is negative, if you feel depressed, you feel down, demoralized, you won't have the strength, the fortitude, the vigilance necessary to fight the battle. And that's what the Alter Rebbe has been addressing in these chapters, starting in chapter 26, 27, now we're in 28, of different things and different tachbulis, methods and strategies the Yetzer Hara uses, the Nefesh Habamis uses to bring us down, the psychological warfare. So in addition to its very power, that it challenges everything in Kedusha for its own selfish needs, it also has another tool in its arsenal, talking about the Nefesh Habamis, to bring us down, to make us feel down. And that doesn't motivate us, that brings us down, that weakens us. So that's also part of the problem. And that's what the Alter Rebbe has been addressing. And we've already reviewed what he spoke in chapter 26 about Atzvos, whether it's Mila D'Alma, Mila D'Shmaya, matters of life, affairs of your daily life, or affairs, heavenly affairs, sins that we feel depressed about. Then he talked about not sins, but the mere fact that you're not perfect, that you even have thoughts can bring you down where you feel like, you're not getting anywhere. And now he's talking about negative thoughts during davening and tefillah, what he said, like he began the chapter in Perek Chav Ches. So chapter 27 was primarily about negative thoughts in general, while you're at work, while you're in the middle of your routines of your day, your daily routines. But he's talking about b'shas Torah and tefillah. So that has its own unique, another unique attack from the Nefesh Habamis and the Yetzer Hara against us. You see, you have these negative thoughts. So the Alter Rebbe is addressing, what do we do with these negative thoughts? So first he negates different approaches. The first thing that he negated that we spoke about in the last class, where he said, Al Yoshis lev elehen el yasir daitimehen kerega. So the first statement he makes right away, that when you have these negative thoughts, there can be very different approaches. You can engage with them. You can allow them to affect you in a negative way. Or, as we'll soon see, the right approach is how that motivates you to grow and become even stronger, which is the ultimate goal. But first we have to negate other things that happen. Because remember, when there are negative thoughts, you want to address that. Like in this context when someone is coming and saying, I don't feel good about myself. So the first thing you want to do is burst that bubble, so to speak. Take out the air from that argument, the negativity that comes out of it. So that's where he says, Al Yoshes Lev Alein, that you should not don't turn your heart to them. Rather divert your attention from them immediately, as soon as it comes your way. So don't think you have to work with it, and don't think you have to in any way allow it to affect you. So first he talks about the option that we find from the Baal Shem Tov, that there was an approach the approach from some of the Talmidei Baal Shem Tov is that the purpose you get negative thoughts is in order to elevate them. So Alter Rebbe then says, "V'gam al yehei sheita." V'gam, in addition to what he just said, to ignore it and divert your attention from it, don't be a fool to think you can elevate the emotional content of the inappropriate thought. Ba'alos midas shel machshava zara kaneda. Kaneda, because this is a derech in the Baal Shem Tov. So a person could say, I have these thoughts because within them really lies something of Kedusha, some spark, and I'm going to elevate it. So that is true. But this is not an Aveda for everyone, says the Alter Rebbe. Ki lo nemru dvorim haim el letzadikim. This advice was meant only for tzaddikim. Tzaddikim who don't have a nefesh habamis yetzer. So their negative thoughts are, how are they getting there to them? She'ein neflem machshava zara shelehem. They have no negative thoughts. Ki im mishal acherim. It's coming from others. Being tzaddikim. Or like he said earlier in chapter 2, a neshama klolis. So neshama klolis feels the pain of other souls. So if another soul that's not a tzaddik has a negative thought, the tzaddik can feel it. It's like the central nervous system will feel, the brain, the mind will feel it. So there, they have a unique role. Why do they have those thoughts? The answer is to elevate them. Alter Rebbe is negating that. It's not relevant to us here, because that's only for tzaddikim. But someone whose these thoughts come to them not from someone else. It's your own thoughts. Why? Because you have a nefesh habamis. Not like a tzaddik. From the negative voice that is there in the heart's left chamber, and that's why it arises in your mind. So a person like that cannot think like a tzaddik. He's not a tzaddik. Since it's coming from your own negative thoughts, from your own animal soul, so how do you think you can elevate? How could you possibly lift them upwards when you yourself are tied below? Like the expression in Chazal, Ein chovesh materes asmei. A person who's bound up, is tied up, cannot free themselves. So that's one thing he negates. He negates now that option, that these negative thoughts are not for you to get engaged with them. So then what are you supposed to do with them? What should be the attitude? Why shouldn't it bring you down? So then he continues. Afal pikein. Since it does coming from you, so you could say, you know what? It will demoralize me. It should demoralize me. Says the Alter Rebbe, afal pikein. Nevertheless, even though we said, if it comes for a tzaddik, so there of course he's not down from it. He knows he has work to do. A negative thought, he has to elevate it. And he has the power to elevate it. But for the rest of us that are not on that level, so of course it's going to bring us down. What else can happen? He says, no. Al yipelibe bekir belias mize otzev nivze b'shas aveda. That option would seem to be the only other option. If it's not to elevate it, then it should bring me down. And it should deteriorate your mood to the point lias mize otzev nivze b'shas aveda, to allow yourself to be brought to a state of sadness and self-loathing during this Aveda, during the davening or the learning, when these thoughts come up, which need to be done liyas b'simcha rabba. A person is supposed to serve Hashem, ivdus Hashem b'simcha rabba. The fact that you have now these negative thoughts, if it brings you down, your mom is going against the mitzvah of doing it b'simcha. So that's from a commandment point of view. You're not allowed to feel down because you have to do it b'simcha. So again, a tzaddik does it b'simcha because he's elevating these thoughts. But what's left for us? What are we supposed to do? So the Alter Rebbe negating this idea that you could say to yourself, maybe it's meant to demoralize me, to show me who I am, to humble me. No. Aved has to be b'simcha rabba. So then what's the story with these negative thoughts? What am I supposed to do with them? I can't elevate them. They're not allowed to demoralize me. So what do you do with them? So he says, it's a wake-up call. It's a wake-up call. Because you have a neshama and you have to always have that positive attitude, if you have these negative thoughts, it's not, we already negated, it's not meant to be elevated, that for the regular person, not a tzaddik. And it's not meant to bring you down. It's meant to strengthen you. Ela adarab. Yischazik Yesef Yesef Emes B'chol Keiche B'kavonas Atfila B'chedva V'simchi Yisera. Rather, on the contrary, this negative thought should strengthen the person and intensify all his powers of concentration and davening and prayer with more happiness and joy. Because that's what resistance does. In other words, look at it as a resistant force that's being sent to you in order to strengthen you. Think of it like a competition. Like you're running a marathon, but you're challenged by someone else, or you're in a Havdalah sports match. So the opponent shouldn't bring you down because he's good. You should elicit deeper strength from within you. Besumei alibay. And how do you get to that point? By taking to heart and concentrating, focusing, meditating on this. Ki nefilas hamachshava zeh hi me'aklipa shebechol asmoli. Because we're talking not about a tzaddik, where it's coming from others. That if inappropriate thought comes to your mind from the klipa in the left chamber of your heart. So Alter Rebbe is giving us direct advice. When a person says, I feel down because of my negative thoughts, no, it's coming from the nefesh habamis in the left side of your heart. That's waging war by a beinani im nefesh halikisha with his divine soul. And that's the very purpose, as we learned earlier. That's the very purpose why you came down, in order to do this battle. So when you're faced with it, v'neida derech hanelchomim v'chein hanevokim yachad, and it's known that in a fight or a wrestling match, keshe'echad mizgaber ozeh hasheni misamis lizgaber gam kein b'chol mamatzei keiche. That when one person is winning, when one person is overpowering the other, so his competition, the competitor, does everything possible to strengthen himself with all his might to face that challenge and to overcome that opponent. That's the way you should look at it. So earlier in the previous chapter, he spoke about that every tchiyah, every refrain, and every restraint, that itself reaches the deepest levels. Now he's speaking about it in a deeper level. And it's interesting, he's talking about it now in Aveda, during Aveda, Torah, Tefillah. There he talked about general negative thoughts. Here he's saying, if it comes b'shas Tefillah and Torah, on the contrary, why is it attacking you now? Because during Tefillah and Torah is when you're at your greatest strength. So what do you think the opposite side is going to do? It's going to strengthen itself to challenge you because you're now at your strength. In the previous chapter, he was talking about, in general, during the day, a person has negative thoughts. So it can bring him down. You have to know that you have to refrain yourself, and that itself is a mitzvah, le'sasuru ach levavchem, like he discussed in chapter 27. Now there too you could apply this principle, that it's those negative thoughts are coming, you have to strengthen yourself. But even more so when you're in the middle of davening or learning. Ulechein, and then he continues, and therefore when the divine soul intensifies its energies to daven, that's what the klipa does. It sees the nefesh halikis is stronger. So I spoke about it before the other way around, that when the nefesh habamis gets stronger, you have to strengthen your nefesh halikis. But the truth is, he's actually spelling it out now the other way around, that when the nefesh halikis gets stronger during davening, that's when the enemy, the klipa, mizgaberes kenegda, the klipa intensifies itself against your divine soul. To confuse it, to disorient it, and to derail it with inappropriate thoughts. So when the nefesh habami strengthens itself, now you strengthen yourself. And that's the key thing. In chapter 27, the previous chapter, there, you don't have that extra strength during davening. There you're talking about a person has a nefesh shalikis. Nefesh habamis comes and sends negative thoughts. So you have to say to yourself, your power is to restrain yourself, discipline. And that reaches the deepest levels. Iskafi sitra achra, as he explained there, chapter 27. Here, it's because you're strengthening yourself during davening, so the nefesh habamis also strengthens itself. That's how you have to look at it. V'loi ketar se'elim, says the Alter Rebbe now. Contrary to the popular misconception, shetayim, that make a mistake, lehichiach min nefilas hamachshava zara meklal shein tfilosam klum, of those who mistakenly argue that their prayers are worthless. Because look at them having negative thoughts. That, of course, is nefesh habamis' ploy to get you to think in a negative way about yourself. So he says that's a mistake. And the argument seems very logical. Because if you daven properly, in an acceptable way, you would never have had there would never have been free, inappropriate thoughts. So doesn't that express a form of failure? So the Alter Rebbe says, "Va'emesi haya kidivreim." If that argument would be correct if you only had one soul, im hoysa nefesh achas levada. So that argument would have been correct. And that one nefesh, hi hamispalelas vi hamachshava mahereres hamachshava zaris, the same soul that prayed is also one that's thinking inappropriate thoughts. So then you can make a case. You know what? You're not praying properly. Because look, the inappropriate thoughts are distracting you. That's if it was all one soul. But in actuality, it's two souls battling each other. In the mind of the person. Kol achas chefza v'ritzena limshel b'eliyas hamayach mamula mimena levada. And each one has a desire to be in control of you, to fill your mind exclusively with its power, with its influence. That changes the whole picture. And then he goes on to explain and says, and as we learned earlier in Tanya, that all the positive thoughts come from nefesh halikis and all the ones from the negative come from nefesh habamis. So now you're faced with two different souls. But they are interacting. And one will strengthen when the other one strengthens. So that's what you need to know. So it's not about, so if it's one soul, you could say, my soul's not worthy. You see, the negative thoughts are more powerful than my prayers. That's not the case. It's never more powerful. It's just a different soul. And its purpose is to challenge you. So when you have that attitude, then it shouldn't bring you down. It should just challenge you and elicit even deeper strengths within you. But that will continue in the next year. So this is also fitting very much to our time, between Yom Kippur and Sukkos, where we go from the awe and the reverence of Yom Kippur and the accountability and the cheshbon hanefesh, the soul searching and introspection, to simcha. Because simcha is part of the process. Even when there are negative things, there's simcha. The simcha, the power to overcome those challenges and bring out even deeper strengths. We should have a very good Yom Tov, Zman Simchaseinu, and a simcha that will be nimshach on Kol Hashana Kula. This has been TanyaApplied.com. You can find all the previous programs and ask any questions on things we've discussed. Again, a good Yom Tov, a good Yom Tov, a good Gebench to Yar.
This has been My Life, Tanya Applied with Rabbi Simon Jacobson. Please join us again next week. Visit ChasidusApplied.com for archived classes and more resources.